And on behalf of my colleagues here at Equity Green, welcome. Really happy to have you. Thank you for joining us. Is it anybody's first time at Equity Green? Oh, I'm so embarrassed I just did that movement. Like, oh my God. That wasn't planned. But thank you for being here, and also gratitude to everybody who helps to pull these off, and special thanks to the comms team and to Kara Lee for all of her work. Yay! So tonight we have the great privilege of hearing from Jordyn Lexton, who is the founder and CEO of New York City-based Drive Change. Alongside Devita Davison, thank you for being here. Of FoodLab Detroit, and I'm going to plan to keep my intros brief because I don't want to spoil anything, and we want to dive into the program. Intro. Jordyn is an awesome person. Also an Equity Green fellow. So a little bit about Equity Green. We provide resources and leadership development to innovative leaders like Jordyn. There's our movement builders who are part of the broader ecosystem that is changing the world for the better, sincerely. And so the Drive Change team, I know some of y'all are here, provides resources to provide returning citizens to cultivate and share and spread their genius through learning in the workplace. And you're going to hear much more about how that works directly from Jordyn in just a moment. And so it is also our great privilege to share the bold ideas of leaders like Jordyn in conversation with other experts who think critically about how issues intersect and inform one another. So tonight our expert is Devita. Devita lived in New York for quite a while before returning to Detroit, but all along the way has been a local activist and entrepreneurship aficionado who, like Jordyn, understands the power of food, community, and justice, and places each at the very center of their work. So FoodLab Detroit is a nonprofit organization that provides entrepreneurs with the support, resources, and skills they need to start and grow a strong, values-based food business. And if you haven't had a chance to familiarize yourself with Devita, maybe watch her amazing TED Talk about the power of urban agriculture and food business in Detroit. Do it. So tonight's event, I must say, is presented as part of the Partnership for Innovating for the Future of New York in New York City. Future of Work in New York City, powered by Barclays. So Equity Green and Barclays this year are collaborating to bring social innovators and their ideas to conversations and solutions concerning the future of work and workforce development here in New York. So now I'm pleased, without further ado, to turn it over to Jordyn, who will kick us off, set the stage for us, share their story before we move into the dialogue portion of the evening. So cool. With that,
I'm really happy to be here tonight, and I read, like, I just feel energy, and the energy in this room feels really great. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here, for taking time to join together in community. A huge thank you to Equity Green for being such an incredible part of making tonight work, but also really being such a central part of Drive Change's story. So Equity Green is a huge part of the reason that we're here, standing here today. I want to thank the Drive Change team for being here. That is what is fuel to my fire, is being able to work with you all every single day. So thank you for taking your time outside of work hours to be here and to make this community feel so rich. To our former fellow in the house, Vidal, and also a huge thank you to you for continuing to always show up for this community. So much love. And to everyone who is a part of this in some way or learning about the work that we're doing in some way, to my family that's here, my wife, my mom, and my grandmother. That's pretty cool. And excitedly as well to our new Hospitality for Social Justice partners who are in the house too. Agatha and Liz from Tarlo's Restaurants in Brooklyn and from Ovenly Bakery, thank you so much for being here, for being a part of this community. We truly can't do this work without everyone who's here. And to Devita, thank you so much for coming from Detroit to New York for this moment, for all of us together. It is always an honor to share space with you. You inspire me, and I'm just honored that you're here. Thank you. So to get things started, I just wanted to set a little bit of context for the organization. I know not everybody has the same layers, and what I wanted to do tonight actually was to just ask you to come with me a little bit on the journey. So the vision and mission of Drive Change stand behind me. This is, really what we're all about, where we're really thinking about intersection of food, workforce development, justice, and what that future of work could be if things like love and trust and learning were at the center of the workplace. And this journey that where we are now starts where I want you to go with me is back to a place that I was in as my own workplace for about 3 years, from 2009 to 2012. I worked here, which is the jail complex, Rikers Island, which is actually just about 2 miles from where we are right now by LaGuardia Airport. And it's a notorious jail, and it also, I'm going to actually specifically take you see these arrows, I'll take you to it's called the Sprung's classroom. You can also see, this is where I grew up. It's there for a reason, because even though I was a teacher on Rikers Island, I was a teacher there because New York is actually one of only 2 states where we still automatically 16-year-olds like they're adults in the criminal justice system. So I'm a native New Yorker, very proud of that, and yet I did not know that New York was one of 2 states to have this harsh law until I was teaching inside of Rikers. And part of the reason I did not know that is because I grew up on 81st and Lexington. And I am a white person with privilege and with economic privilege that allowed me to have a street ahead of me paved with green lights. And yet here I was working inside of a classroom that looked something like this, with young adults who were filled with the same visions and talents and curiosity as I was growing up just 2 miles away, thinking about what does that future hold? What could I go on to do? And yet, because of our harsh system, many of my students, if they were actually released, the likelihood to try to find work, to go back to school, oftentimes to even just live in their own housing, there were red lights, stop signs, dead ends, barriers to those pathways and those opportunities. And I think I chose this photo also too, just because this is really what those classrooms look like. I often had more people in my classroom than this, but just really trying to ground ourselves in the environments that we're talking about and that we're saying are reasonable for our neighbors, for our young people, for our brothers and our sisters and our children. And I think it really is important to know what this actually looks like and what the racist and classist and really dehumanizing structures of our jails are doing. 80% of my students also are pretrial detainees. So they've yet to actually go to be sentenced because they just can't afford their bail often. So a lot of what we're talking about here is designed injustice. We asked everybody, my mom was very helpful in doing this, what you would spend $257,000 on if it was New York City public funding. We asked that number because that's actually what it costs to incarcerate a single person for 1 year on Rikers Island. So if we thought about redistributing that to all of the beautiful ideas that you guys came up with, just think about the kind of city and the kind of future we could be a part of as well. So I don't need to really share too many more photos to show you and tell you how horrible and awful Rikers Island is. A trigger warning that this next video is graphic, but that's really what it was like. And it's important for people to know that that's what we're talking about in terms of the environments that people are suffering in and are in. And as I'm taking you back to actually this classroom, and I'm taking you to a moment where I taught a Raisin in the Sun every year. And one year we're in class, and a student, and we're teaching the poem Langston Hughes' poem, A Dream Deferred, in the beginning of the book. And a student in the front row says to me, do you think I could be an architect? And I said yes. I said yes. I mean, I gave him a spiel, like a little bit of a long, this will be hard thing, but I ultimately said, yes, you could be an architect. Just apply yourself. You're a smart person. You can make it happen. And a student who, for the teachers in the room, a student who was completely asleep in the back of the class, rose and woke up and just screamed, hell no. And said, listen, I appreciate what you're trying to do here, no disrespect, but you're selling dreams. And that moment for me, we talk about, I mean, I had been witnessing injustice at Rikers Island for 3 years. It was really in that moment where I recognized, you know what, people have been talking about the need for employment. And people are talking about really needing access to opportunity. How can I build a business that will not only employ people, but will really invest in all of the brilliance that I was able to witness in the young people that I worked with while on Rikers Island? And I took stock and I looked around and I noticed that one of the only areas inside of Rikers where people were being treated like full human beings and were connecting and feeling the restorative practices was in a culinary arts class. It was through the power of connecting through a shared meal that people were feeling whole and were talking to each other and were really feeling like, oh, I remember what it's like to be myself and to be human. And also the skills in a kitchen, like communication and teamwork and just the thoroughness you need. It clearly to me was such a place where we could make a kitchen or a restaurant or a food truck a classroom. And that's where the vision for Drive Change came from. That was 2012. And in 2014, we launched our first food truck for social justice. And what we did was we said, we're going to build a food truck business so that it's mobile, it gets out in the community, it connects, it raises awareness about some of the stuff we talked about tonight. And it's the paid workplace experience for young adults coming home from jail. So for the first 3 years, starting in 2014, we ran a food truck business called Snow Day. It worked with 8 young people every single year in a full paid, full-time job experience. That food truck, people worked on the truck, back in our kitchen, and we taught professional development, a lot around youth-led advocacy. And it became the living, breathing idea of making a business and turning a into that teaching setting in that classroom. And these are just some of the ways, I picked this photo also too, just because of also the way in which power dynamics can shift, right? You have a young person now who is, all their experiences with police have been pretty horrible and detrimental, and now this officer is ordering lunch from you and asking you, like, what's your favorite thing on the menu? And that is just, I think, an example of the kind of community and the way that we can push people to think outside of themselves. Yeah, the tattoos are not mandatory, but
it says live.
it's pretty real. Yeah, it's completely. I want everyone, all staff members should know that they're not mandatory. That's my grandma, our staff, also too. I knew she was coming tonight, so I threw it out. And we also, our food truck won the Vendy Award for Best Food Truck in New York City. So we always understood that we needed to kind of really run a business that was hopefully gonna be sustainable and be at the top of the market so that we could give young people coming out of the system also that experience of being a part. And everyone built this with us. Like, this was built with all of the young people that we've worked with. We learned that building new food trucks ourselves was not the right way for us to grow, because the reality is that we can only work with 8 young people per truck, and the stability in the food truck industry is pretty challenging. So what we decided was the other people were reaching out to us and saying, we're food businesses, we want to hire returning citizens, we want some support in understanding how to use our business as a tool for teaching and learning, we want to affiliate with you. And so now I'm so excited about it. We've decided to partner. We're going to partner with, this year, 3 companies, 5 to 7 other businesses, and the fellows are now trained internally at Drive Change, but they're going to work for these other workplaces as well. And it allows us to work with now many more young people per year. We're doubling from 8, well, actually going from 8 people last year to 20 this year, and we'll be able to grow and scale that even more over the next coming years.
22.
22. All right. See, they couldn't choose 10. They had to choose 11. So 22. So this is just some stuff about us, a little bit of our funding challenges and also success. In the fall, we were invested in a multi-million-dollar contract by the city, which is something that we're still negotiating the terms for. So for anyone who's done city government contract work, might be a good way to get connected and help us as well. And again, this is just what you don't see here is that there's a 0 here because 0 of the people who've gone through Drive Change have been rearrested or reincarcerated. And that is our biggest accomplishment, hands down. And yeah, I'm not going to get too much into this because I really want Devita to come up here, but we do have now, we're using our truck to run justice and food themed events. You can learn more about that on our website as well. And this is the approach we're taking now to workforce development. So we're not only working with the talent, the formerly incarcerated youth, we're working with the managers of our business partners. They're going to go through a training themselves, and then they're going to take on young people after that training. And our awesome coaches who are here in the room are going to support not only the fellows, but the managers through a 10-month engagement. So we're really excited about this model. This is now what the Snow Day food truck looks like. Jen designed it, so that's, yeah. And this again, just the way we're using the truck now as an engagement tool to really spread the word about justice and injustice inside of the system. So I'm gonna actually mostly leave it there because I really want Devita to come up and get more into the themes around the role of food in justice and restorative justice, the role business can play in teaching, and also how do we reimagine structures and systems when we're working within them. Oh, thanks. Yeah, sorry.
Anyone that needs a seat, there's some seats over here. Grab a seat.
Oh my gosh. What am I doing? This is fancy, Jordyn.
I know. Did we do it?
I think so.
Okay. We did it. Testing. For the computer.
Oh, okay.
That's my sense.
Okay.
Okay.
Wow.
Wow.
This is such an amazing crowd. Thank y'all for coming out. So I'm from Detroit by way of Alabama. My mother and father migrated to Detroit during a movement that was called the Great Migration, when African Americans were moving from the South to the North. And so even though I'm from Detroit and lived in New York for 20 years, you'll still hear that Southern accent come out from time to time. So I say y'all. But no, this is fantastic. You know what I love, Jordyn? I love you.
Well,
I do. But I love the Drive Change team.
I
Y'all
know.
roll deep.
Yeah. I didn't mention earlier that our chef instructor Sean put those devil eggs.
5 minutes.
Yeah, it was pretty incredible.
It was really late.
Yeah. It's just kind of like, don't like mess with Drive Change because listen, you got to deal with the whole team. So I love that. And so let's have a conversation. Let's talk. And so you took the audience on a journey through your presentation, which was amazing. I want to take the audience on a journey through our conversation. Mm-hmm. So what I want to do is I want to start at 33,000 feet in the air, and then I want to get micro. And when I talk about starting at 33,000 feet in the air, I want to talk about this criminal justice system, the system that you talked about, the system that we want to dismantle, the system that is exploitive, the system that is oppressive, the system that, in the words of Michelle Alexander, is the new Jim Crow.
Correct.
The system that, in terms of Ava DuVernay in 13th, is nothing but the new slavery. So let's talk about the system, right? And so what I want to do, Jordyn, is that the work of Drive Change is so important. But when we start talking about dismantling systems and structures, Drive Change can't do this work alone.
Yeah.
So in tandem with the work that Drive Change is doing, there are also other organizations that also are using food at the intersection of the criminal justice system. That's how big this problem is. It's not a New York problem.
No.
It is a problem in the United States of America,
Yeah.
right? In terms of the number of folks this country cages,
Yeah.
human bodies. So you've got Homeboy Industries out in California using food
Yep.
as a way to work with returning citizens and incarcerated men and women.
Yep.
Using food as a social enterprise. You've got Homeboy Bakery, you've got Homeboy Diner, you've got Homeboy Cafe. You've got Planting Justice in East Oakland, who are using also food at the intersection, urban agriculture, working with returning citizens. They now, if you have not read the Kale, Not Jail article that was in the New York Times, read that article, particularly for those in the room that are interested in social enterprise. Planting Justice, $2 million kind of budget, 60% of that is through earned revenue.
Wow.
I
That's
mean,
amazing. For anyone who
amazing.
knows about the social enterprise space, I'll just share what we're a nonprofit that owns a for-profit subsidiary, and our earned revenue has only been about 20% of our overall operating budget. So to get to 60, that's our long-term goal, is to
absolutely.
get to about 70%.
And so, and you and I know about the amazing work at Soul Fire Farm.
Yeah,
upstate.
amazing.
So we see work at the intersection of food and justice all the time. And so this is what I want you to answer. When we talk about this criminal justice system, you and I, of course, may say that it's broken. But is it really broken,
Well,
Jordan?
I think that's a really good...
Is it really broken?
Yeah.
Or are black bodies being caged for economic reasons?
Yeah, I think one of the things, so one of our co-founders, Roy Waterman, always says, and it's completely true, that our system is not broken. It's actually was intentionally designed to do exactly what it's doing.
Right.
So it's working actually exactly how it was designed to be working, because it is the grandchild of slavery. It was built off of the criminalization of black and brown bodies for profit. There are prisons that are for profit, which I can't even, that is just an incredible thing to think about, but ties back to some of our other thoughts and questions around just how do you try to dismantle some of the elements of capitalism while being in it and also while needing resources to do this. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, in New York, of the population of young adults that I worked with, 93% are black and brown young people. And the neighborhoods in which people are being over-policed and criminalized, the school-to-prison pipeline, all of this is a directed racial injustice.
So let's draw a thread. So one of the things that we lifted up in this conversation is around ethnicity. 93% of those that are incarcerated that you've come in contact with are black and brown bodies. Clearly, we know that there's a racial component. Is there a class component?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, as I was saying, one of the things I think is really critically important for people to understand is that 80% of the people on Rikers Island are pre-trial detainees. So these are individuals who are there because in most cases they just can't afford their bail. And
Give me an example of how
Yeah.
much it would cost if they could have.
Yeah, so it depends a little bit on, is it a felony, is it a misdemeanor, but the average bail is around $910. And there are bails set on people for just $1. So when you think about the way in which the economy, the way we think about money and value and how we're tying that up to whether or not somebody has the opportunity to stay at home and wait their trial and to go back to work and to take care of their kids and to go to school and to have the stability that is really necessary in your life, versus someone who doesn't have that economic support and spends, not only do those things I just mentioned get completely disrupted, but they're spending time in really traumatic environments.
Right.
So yeah, it's completely connected to class.
All right, so this is where I want folks to begin to connect the dots, because the work that Drive Change is doing is very much so what we call intersectional, right? It's layered. It's multiple problems. One of the problems that Jordyn is talking about right now It's not only the criminal justice system, but the root cause of why you see so many black and brown folks in the criminal justice system is that we know it's a systemic issue, but also we know that it's a poverty and class issue as well. So how do we address this economic problem, right? Drive Change is addressing that. Let me ask you this question. And so we're gonna talk about the economic bucket in terms of how you all are kind of approaching that issue. The second thing in which this violent criminal justice system affects is it affects somebody's spirit.
For sure.
It breaks people down. And so not only does it affect the young person that is incarcerated, but it also affects that young person's family as well.
Yeah.
There's this emotional tension. I was telling Jordyn, we were on the phone, that there was Caught.
Yeah, have you guys listened?
Yeah.
You should. Like, put it in your list of podcasts to listen to. Caught?
It's called Caught.
It's
It's an NPR.
yeah,
Oh.
WNYC.
Oh, it's so powerful. It's so powerful. And I was telling Jordyn, I said, you know, Jordyn, I was listening to this one particular episode of Caught and it was a 16-year-old male, and he was incarcerated. And his mother couldn't afford to put money in his commissary. And because his mother couldn't afford to put money in the commissary, he made a mental decision that he was going to perform in a way in which his behavior would send him to the hole, would send him into solitary. And the reason why he did that is because he said when he saw other folks around him who would go into their commissary to get things, if he didn't have it, it could force him to become violent with another inmate. And so to remove himself from that situation, he got into a fight with a guard. So the guard could throw him into solitary so he wouldn't be around people. And the reason why he didn't want to be around people is because his mother couldn't afford to put money in commissary. Do you see how this criminal justice thing just messes with folks' psyche? So when you were working in Rikers, what was the attitude emotionally? And then when you're working with the young people who are coming home, how is their spirit? How is their...
Yeah. I mean, I think one thing that I think is so important, because that story that you tell is a really, that's one story, but that's so common. It's like happening all the time to so many. I don't know if people have heard about Khalif Browder.
Of course.
But that's one person whose story was, featured in the New Yorker. But that is a lot. That is not just one person. That is not an outlier. That is an individual that is representative of a population that is being broken down. And I think the thing that I think is most critically important about this, though, is that for me, it was actually the fact that all of that environment was so traumatic, and people were being decent, like decent to me and decent to each other, and finding little things to do to remind. Like, I remember people, would bring extra pencils to share it with another student, or would make sure to open the door for me, or these things that were so decent in such a, and they would tell me how the night before, they'd be standing and a CO would just be pissed off and get everybody up at 3 a.m. and have them hold their mattresses against the wall for 6 hours in the middle of the night. And then they're supposed to show up, they're required to go to school. And then they're supposed to show up to our classroom and actually try to, it's and I remember thinking, and I'd done some work, I'm culturally Jewish, food has been a big part of my life for that reason, but also when I did some work reading about the conditions around the Holocaust, and this book that's called The Banality of Evil, which is really about how, a lot of the executioners during the Holocaust were decent people before they weren't.
That's right.
And just putting yourself in that position and thinking about how would I did that every day I was on Rikers Island. I thought to myself, if I had to stand holding a mattress in the middle of the night while potentially getting beat on the back of the head, how would I behave the next day?
That's right.
What decisions would I decide to make as a result of just the pure environmental conditions we're in? And I think, so it was, to me, it was really witnessing the humanity. And again, that culinary arts class was really a place where that came through and came out. Where
I'm gonna ask you to put a comma, put a pause right there. Because that's
cork.
important. Put a cork in it. Comma. I'm going there. I'm gonna get there.
Yeah.
and this is where I'm going to go with it. We've set the stage for the conditions, right? Right? So folks in the room can kind of feel what we're dealing with. Folks in the room can kind of understand the systems and the structures. And I'm going to parallel that for a second with the work that I do in Detroit. And so I lived in New York for 20 years. Never thought that I was going to actually move back to my hometown, Detroit, but God saw a different plan for me. I, 2 years prior, bought a home in Long Island, South Freeport. Beautiful maritime community, located in between two canals, the Hudson and the Wycliffe. And a terrible storm/hurricane hit New York in 2012. It was called Hurricane Sandy. Hurricane Sandy hit Long Island. 9 feet of water ran through my house. I was in the attic for 2 days waiting for that water to secede. And I remember at that moment, I'm on the phone with my father, who's a minister, and my father was praying. And he had some other ministers. We're doing what we call intercessory prayer. We call that in the Baptist church. When you get a whole bunch of folks on the phone, everybody praying. People don't know who gonna get to God first, so everybody got praying. And his child was in a hurricane, so Daddy was praying. And I remember saying to Mom and Dad, I said, Mommy and Daddy, if I make it out of here alive, I'm coming home. I lived in New York for 20 years, but still call Detroit home. Oprah calls that the aha moment. And so I came back to Detroit, and make a long story short, and became the executive director of FoodLab Detroit. And I will never forget this, Jordyn. I had just left New York, my community. It looked like when I returned back to Detroit, it too had been hit by a hurricane, an economic hurricane. And so when I started working with food entrepreneurs, I'll never forget this. Named Miss Renee. She was an older African-American woman, and I was helping incubate food businesses in Detroit out of a small church kitchen in a community. And she was making cookies. She wanted, her dream was to start a bakery. It was me, Miss Renee, and the inspector. And I can never forget that day because it was the day that Miss Renee got her license. And I said, Miss Renee, I am so happy that I was in this kitchen with you. I'm a part of your journey. You started your business. I am so happy. She looked at me as only an elder could do. And she said, Devita, stop saying that you helped me start my business. And I thought, oh, the elder is checking me, snatching edges. I'm trying to take credit for something that I ain't even do. And so I said, yes, ma'am. Yes, Miss Renee. And she says, don't ever say that you helped me start my business. What you helped me start was my dream. Jordyn, my question to you is, do you feel like the work that you're doing at Drive Change and the young people that you are working with, helping them to fulfill the dream, helping them to fulfill the dream, even though that boy in the back of the room said, no, you will never be an architect.
Right.
You saw a different way.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, that goes back to environmental conditions. I think when at the end of the day, everything is people. Like companies are people, governments are people, everything is people. And so at the end of the day, things are designed. People write things down on paper, then people follow what people write down, then people talk about, like, this is how we're going to. And so I think at the core of knowing that, it gets a little bit to that idea of what is possible, what could we imagine? And sure, inside of these structures and systems, we see a lot of harshness and injustice.
But why was that culinary program different?
Yeah, I think food is restorative power. But really thinking about, your point about the space of dreams, I think that I believe that business principles should be trust and love, Like, I think that there are ways to cultivate community, and that businesses can be a real tool in that. And, so it's not about, for us, it's not about letting the workplace teach, it does, it teaches things like, like knife skills, for example. But it's really about how being inside of an environment, you're learning, and being inside of a workplace, you're learning those what we call essential skills. Right. You're learning communication skills. You're learning conflict resolution. Anyone who works in food knows there's a lot of conflicts. So you're learning how to cope with your emotions, and not just kind of, freak out and let that, you really figure out how to You're learning time management and diligence and what we call grit also too. And for us, it's really letting the business be the platform for these things that are much deeper than what we would call like industry specific skills, right? Like let's invest in humans. Let's let businesses really invest in humans. And like the way that Lindsay talked about Drive Change at the beginning, with us using the business as a tool for people to be able to cultivate their genius. That's how we think about it. There's an Albert Einstein quote. I don't know that some people know it, but it's everyone's a genius. But if you teach a fish by its ability to climb trees, it'll go its whole life believing it's stupid. And just like recognizing that I believe that. And so I think what we've built is we've built an organization and built a business, but we've built, like fabric of community and support and skills that go way, way beyond just the back and front of house of the food sector.
So let's go from this kind of 33,000 feet in the air, kind of macro criminal justice system and the intersectionalities of various different food organizations, and let's get really specific to Drive Change. So the first thing I'm going to ask you is about what our theory of change at FoodLab Detroit is, that we believe in going from the I, which is kind of like the individual business, so cultivate businesses, provide them workshops and training. The real secret sauce of FoodLab is the we. It's important that we are a community of business owners, because in order to affect change, you can't do it by yourself.
For sure.
You have to be in community with other folks. So we go from the I to the we to the it. It is the problem. It is the movement. It is the intersectionality between food, entrepreneurship, and movement building. That's our theory of change. So I want to go from the I, you, to the we, which is the team, to the it, which is really the movement itself.
Yeah.
So you, so much of social enterprises, nonprofit organizations, the DNA of the owner is deeply embedded into that organization.
Yeah.
You brought it out, so I'm just going to go ahead and just continue to draw that thread, which is, here you are, a white person with privilege, working with black and brown folks who probably didn't have the same kind of privileges that you had. How do you wrestle with that? How do you begin to develop relationships and trust so that you can do the work that you do in an authentic way?
Yeah, I mean, I think about that all the time. I think a lot of times too, I notice in myself that I sort of try to steep my credibility in telling people that I taught on Rikers Island.
That's right.
Like to ground people in like, oh, I'm not just a random white person. Like I have, and I think that I notice it. I notice that I'm doing that. And then I think it's really also about thinking about what representation looks like on our staff, what representation looks like on our board, thinking about the fact that one day I don't see myself being the leader of Drive Change, and that's something that I think is important. For as much as an individual builds something, like it needs to be something that's sustainable and exists outside of any single one person. And I think that as a white person, I don't know that I'm the best leader for this organization. I think that I also too, really think about how, one of the things about being as someone who's identified as queer my whole life as well, the reimagination piece, I've had to reimagine what a family might look like, or I use gender neutral pronouns. Like I've had to make that a reality, and so when I think about social enterprise and I think about designed with that vision of social good in place, I think it requires unimagining, like the ability to see something different than what is the current status quo. And in some ways, that part of my identity is pretty central in the way that I think about the growth and the building of Drive Change. But I also think one thing I've learned a bit over time too is that sometimes it's right for it to be my voice, and sometimes it's really not.
That's
and
right.
Figuring out when to actually not be the one speaking or not be the one in front of the group is a huge part of that journey.
So you took me there where I wanted to go next. So, you quoted and lifted up Albert Einstein. I'm going to quote and lift up someone who I think is just as smart as Albert Einstein, and he's a hero of mine. And I think it's important to lift him up and bring him into the space because he works in the criminal justice system, and his name is Brian Stevens.
Yeah.
And absolutely amazing. He's a brilliant, brilliant lawyer, and he only takes the cases of youth that are on death row. And Brian, I remember him telling a story, and he talks about that slavery was not the most violent. Slavery was not the most embarrassing kind of part of America's history. As bad as it was, he was like, slavery ain't nothing compared to the social construct of white supremacy that was created to justify slavery in the first place.
Yeah.
And so the dismantling of white supremacy is so important when we talk about this dismantling of systems within itself. And so I can appreciate the fact that you as a white person knows when to step up and also know when to step back.
Yeah.
Because it's about power, right?
Absolutely.
It's about power. So now going to the we, how are you empowering your team right now? Particularly the folks on your team, and even who knows? You talked about you might not see yourself as the next or the continued executive director of Drive Change, and you've got an incredible team, but it might be a returning citizen. That might be one of your fellows who might be the next ED.
That would be amazing.
You know, so how are you empowering your team?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to have them answer that question. I mean, I think, building an organization is really hard. You know what it's like to be in leadership. It's not an easy thing to do. And I think one of the things that, and you mentioned also too, in thinking about the ways in which all of what we're talking about comes out of the structures built upon white supremacy, that's another thing that I think is significant as a white leader in the space, to be able to be in spaces and to say that out loud, to acknowledge that, to recognize that, because there are certain spaces where I do have more power and privilege as a result of being bold and then stepping into that space is something that I think that I recognize that I'm doing. I think that also it's about ownership. I'm learning how to be a manager, which is hard. So, over the course of the history of Drive Change 2, we've gone through different iterations where, in the early stages, I say this all the time, I wouldn't have wanted to work for me. It's really hard to build something and not be so emotionally attached to all of the decisions and outcomes. And I think at this point, I have such incredible leadership and talent on the Drive Change team. And that's what makes us strong. Understanding that our individual voices and also that collective we is what makes us strong. It's what makes us dynamic. It's what makes us longer term sustainable. And getting to a place where I understood that I actually needed to remove myself from a lot of the roles and works on our team so that we could have space and thrive and that people could step into their own leadership. James, who he said don't call me out, but I'm going to call him out. So James, who's our fellowship director, that's James. So, James, when James joined the team, which was July, Jennifer, who's in the front row, also helped Drive Change completely rebuilt. So about a year ago, for a month, I was the only full-time staff member at Drive Change. And I called Jen, who had met us working, we were at Afropunk, she met us there, had a grilled cheese sandwich, was like, this is amazing, learned about the organization. And
of course Jennifer was at Afropunk.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, clearly.
She's not telling you how I met her in glitter and sequins.
That's another.
What pronoun did you use?
Huh?
To me?
Oh, no, she said she.
Well, we were talking.
That-
yeah,
yes.
yeah. That's actually the first time she's ever mispronounced me, which is pretty amazing. But really, like, what is amazing is that we met at Afropunk, and that Jen stayed connected to Drive Change and volunteered. And when I was in a really scary place with the organization, where I really was the only full-time staff member a year ago, I called Jen and I said, hey, I need your help. And she was working in corporate HR. A few things happened, but she decided to leave her job and helped rebuild the organization. And so James joined the team in July of just last year. And when that moment happened, it was a recognition of, like, if we're going to really think about what the long-term sustainability of this organization looks like, there's got to be clear ownership, clear leadership. Jen redesigned our whole brand. James took the vision of what hospitality for social justice could be and would be, and designed, like, a curriculum it's amazing what the program is that he's been able to put together. And he brought on 2 incredible coaches, Priscilla and Sarah, to help us lead this work in the organization. And you know, it's without question, and my wife Danny can attest to this, like I would not be in this chair if it were not for these people that are in this room right now.
So we've got the wrap-up sign. So I've got one more question to wrap up, and then just a comment that the motto is for all y'all social entrepreneurs that's in the room, if you want to thrive in organization, you need to snatch you up a black woman real quick, fast, in a hurry. Because if you don't have a sister in your organization, I don't know what you're doing. You are not, okay? You are not about this work. No, I'm just joking. Actually, I'm not. But my last and final question and commentary, and wrap this up, I'm gonna move to the it, and that is the vision. What does it look like? Do we have a criminal justice system in the future? Have we dismantled the whole shit? Have we just taken it all down? I mean, what is the vision?
I mean, hopefully, you know, I think the long-term vision of Drive Change is like we don't need to exist, you know, because we live in a society, in a world where we've reimagined an actual just system. You know, Echoing Green runs a company that is finding social entrepreneurs. I'd like every entrepreneur to be social, you know, to think about what it means beyond just your financial return, but to invest in our community collectively, that we place value on those things. You know, specifically with our new affiliation model, like you mentioned at the beginning, this is about community building and movement building. We believe that there is a growing socially conscious consumer, especially in food. We've cared now for years where product comes from. We think people are going to start to care more about how people are treated in that environment. And so what we're building with the support of our partners who are in the room and should probably raise their hands also too, is a connection of like-minded food businesses that are standing up for these social justice values and are saying we want our workplaces to be places where people can thrive. And we see that business and our criminal justice system are built on white supremacist structures. And we want to do the hard work of getting a little uncomfortable to think about how we can reimagine business together. And food is a great way to do that because food is a connector. And it's such a tool of just, you know, community building. So we have the vision of working with about 900 businesses within the next 6 years, which is about 10% of the New York food space. And so if we can do that, we think that it becomes, you know, sort of like a tidal wave. You would see like a a certified by Hospitality for Social Justice or a Drive Change, and it would be a decision. You would say, you know what, that's cool. I want to eat there. I want to hire that vendor because I know that this business stands up for some of the values that I'm invested in and care about too.
So let's put it to the audience. We have a couple minutes for Q&A. All right. Any questions? The floor. I'm turning it over to y'all. This is come on now. This is a smart. This is a smart group of. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Please, you Sharon.
My name is Sharon.
Okay, Sharon.
Hello.
Hey, Sharon.
I'd like to know how you select your fellows.
Very good question.
I'm going to turn it over to the fellowship team for that one because they just made selections of 11 fellows in our new fellowship starting June 4th.
My name is Priscilla. I'm the fellowship coach. So we had 4 steps. It was an application process. We were using a tool. It was called Day 100, which was basically a personality assessment. Then we called them back for an interview and then another interview. But what we really wanted to see was we recognize all the issues that are going on in the community, right? But we wanted to see the fellows that were going to fall through. You were going to fill out the application completely. You were going to follow up with the Date 100, which was really difficult because we saw some amazing applications for people who didn't fill out the Date 100. How do you make that choice? But for us, it was like just following those steps, at least let us know that you were ready, right? And then we interviewed. A lot of times it was us 3. Sometimes our chef, Sean, was involved in the interviews. And it was just kind of like we asked certain questions, vibe, feelings, but we had specific questions that we asked. And we were just looking for people a learner's mind. And that we recognize the issues that are going on in our community, but more importantly, that people that we're gonna come in and say, okay, you know, we're ready to take in something new. So it's a difficult process. I was saying one of the hardest parts were the people that we had to say no to. Because obviously we were like, yay, come on. But it was like, you know, maybe not now. So just the engagement of afterwards, the people that didn't make it to this fellowship, maybe staying in contact with them. But yeah, we had a process.
Priscilla, let me ask you a question. Number one is, how many applicants applied for the fellowship? And where do these applicants come from? Is there a call out? Is there, who are your partners on the ground or in the community that you
We
send?
have a lot of partners. So we reached out to a lot of different CEOs around the community. I see some faces here that look a little familiar.
You're going to have to break that acronym down. You're going to have to.
Community-based organizations.
Okay.
So we reached out to a lot of those. We also did job fair. What else did we do? We had workshops. Instagram was really popular. It turned out that Instagram at the last inning was probably one of the most popular tools we used.
We used our food truck actually too.
Yeah,
We had
used
on our
food truck.
yeah, we used that as like a marketing
Some
tool
guerrilla
to get.
marketing we called it.
Yeah.
So we had different ways of communicating with the community that we were out here. We were recruiting and we were doing the work. Towards the last 2 weeks, I think we got like a big push. People that really applied towards those last 2 weeks. But we had a large effort from a lot of different departments.
Do we
One-
have a specific day that we were starting? We pushed harder in the end,
That's right.
but there was also applicants who were more intrigued to start sooner
Mm-hmm.
because
Mhm.
they won't work.
That's right.
Which is telling for the future. And again, like Priscilla was saying no to people. I think long-term vision is not saying no, but here are resources for further employment, or you may not be one of the 10 in our fellowship, but go work for.
Yeah.
I would love to hire you. We don't know if they have essential skills, but we'll hire you.
Yeah. You know, one of the issues I have sometimes, you know, let me tell you something. Let me tell you something right now. I love my well-meaning white folks. I really do. When y'all come into the community, I do. I really do. But some don't have a clue and don't team up and partner with grassroots organizations and come in thinking they just have all the answers and then want to know why they don't get the outcome or the impact that their little report told them that they were supposed to have. And so I'm just kind of like, y'all should have asked somebody that when you are filling out or when you're doing a application, you got to make it mobile friendly, because the folks and the young people in the hood, they may not have computers at home, but they damn sure use their phone. Like, you got to ask these questions. Yo, you can't. And so I'm wondering, you know, did you all really think about who the target market is, who the user is, and made it so that particular demographic, James, I'm asking you, because you're the director of this thing now, that demographic don't have any problems or any barriers trying to navigate the process?
We found out at the end that it was a lot more difficult than we expected.
Oh, Lord, here we go.
But one thing we did find out also is that
That's all right.
the population is the population. Our vision is to help the formerly incarcerated youth between the ages of 18 and 25. This youth is going to determine who is going to make it to the end and who is not going to make it. We can't be the organization that says we're going to work with one person and not work with the other. I think they determine that on themselves. I remember being in high school where the teacher would say, James, if you don't pass, it's your fault. If you don't come to class, it's your fault. I cannot make you pass, but if you do these things, you will pass. And that's what we have to leave it to them to say, you know what? These are the steps. If you decide not to go from one step to the next, we might love you, but your application, you have a great application, but you didn't do the day 100. We can't make you do the day 100. But even with the mobile friendly application, even if we have that, we can make it as easy as we can. But if you don't take it from one step to the next, then that's on you, and somebody else will. And the person that does, that's what we need to concentrate on. That's what we decided to do. Work with the people who we can concentrate our efforts on, because they concentrate their efforts on us. And at the end of the day, we started with the 8 people we wanted to work with, and then we decided, you know what, let's do 10. Let's be realistic. Attrition is a real thing in business. And also working with people, there is attrition, but then we wanted to work with 10, and then we realized, you know what, we can't
That's right.
11, that'd be right.
That's right, that's right. And James, listen, I hear you on that. Like the folks who put forth the most effort, the people who really, really want it, like they will matriculate through the process. But let me tell you something that Daddy told me, and my father's a preacher. And so he told me this a long time ago. There's an old parable in the Bible that said if you give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day. But if you teach a man to fish, he'll eat for the rest of his life. But Daddy said nobody asks the question on if the man who has access to the water. Who has access to the fishing rights.
Yeah.
And so as much as you are absolutely correct, I think it is really incumbent on us to make sure access is not a problem.
Yeah.
Access is not a barrier. I hear you. You are absolutely right. But also, be cognizant that we try to lower the barriers as much as possible. So those folks who really, really want it, they can get through, right?
No, I understand completely, and I also met with a really good guy, and he said, James, listen, as many hurdles as you're going to put up, you're creating attrition for the organization, but at the same time, we know that as an organization, we're creating a quality experience.
That's right.
And we would love to help or work with 100 youth per year, but it's just not realistic.
It can if you got the money. So the folks in this room need to write the check. If you had the money, you could do it. That's right.
But if that's the case,
Some funders in the house? Like, where's the grant applications at? Let's get that process going, moving.
I think importantly in that aspect as well, because I was the fourth portion of the interview process. I sat down with each of the fellows to get an understanding of what their traumas and their triggers were. I think that's one of the things that kind of differentiates Drive Change from any of the other organizations. I'm a certified DMT, dynamic mindfulness trainer, and it's the understanding that trauma is something that happens to everyone.
That's right.
Whether it be stress, or you've been incarcerated, or you're food insecure, or. Those triggers and those traumas may be different, but the way that they impact you are all the same.
That's
They're
right.
all the same. And having conversations with these young people about what their experience has been, and what it is that they want, how they dream, where they want to see themselves, what they want to accomplish for themselves, what makes them proud, if they've ever been proud, if anyone has ever told them that they were proud of them, or that they loved them, or that they could be something, or that this fellowship is something that they could continue and thrive in, and excel in, and graduate from. And getting those answers, there are definitely a couple of no's that they didn't necessarily agree with, but having an understanding based on the work that I've done and I do to ensure that the team collective, the fellowship that we're creating, is a group of 11 very solid people that will have the support, that will be learning coping skills and understanding how they can show up as both and Drive Change's kitchen as well as with our partners is integral for them to be able to grow and succeed moving forward and being those people that they dream themselves to be.
That's right. I love that. I love that.
And the mindfulness piece is also really a big part of it too.
Absolutely.
You know, like because I think that's something, again, when we think about now, like these buzzwords in business, right? Like innovation, and it's often in the wealthiest spaces that things like mindfulness take place, you know, but really thinking about how inside of our day-to-day workplaces and lives, like how do we think about just the design of a breath in the, you know, like how do you coach some of that stuff so that people are actually practicing some of the tools of mindfulness while they're in the middle of their own day-to-day lives, and how are businesses thinking about that from the ground up? So, you know, I think we're really thinking intentionally about all the components of the touch points that we have with fellows and how to ensure that, you know, we're that learner's mind that was mentioned, that's for everyone, right? Like that's how we approach everything we do.
Okay. Any more questions? We got time for a couple more. Yes, ma'am. What's your name?
Molly.
Molly.
I work in Fortune Society.
Okay. Oh, okay.
So just as you've been talking, I've been thinking about, you know, working with the youth and the, you know, sort of the accessibility of working with, I don't want to say the pliable, but, you know, people who are young, people who have many dreams ahead of them. I work primarily with people who have not had very much hard skills training, or, you know, who, you know, maybe been incarcerated for like 20 years, 35 years, or, you know, or maybe 1 year, something like that. But who don't necessarily have like the big shiny dream ahead of them, and need exactly what you guys are doing, and don't have sort of the youth part of it backing them up. So like, what's your vision of partnership for people who are already part of the community or who are trying to re-enter their community as, over the age of 25 or over the age of 50?
Yeah.
Need this kind of thing.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think like we've talked about this a lot too, about how it's not just any one single organization, right? You need to build movements around this. These ideas need to become normalized and natural, like so the fabrics of them become similar, even if they're applied to different populations. So, because we're specifically working with young adults because they are it's such a vulnerable population, and that the recidivism rate for a young adult treated like an adult in jail is 70%, which is 30% higher than the national average. And so, we know we can't, because of resources, like you said, and because we have this go deep rather than go broad approach, we know and understand that by working with 10 young adults per year, we're in, it's unfortunate how many individuals are so deeply impacted by these issues. But I think it's about sharing this value system. What are the core values of organizations or really the practices that are working and connected, and how do we share that across platforms so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel over and over and over again? Because, I don't see Drive Change necessarily going beyond that 18 to 25 population, but I do think that we understand that it requires a whole community of like-minded organizations and people to actually really make shifts.
So I wanted to comment on that because Molly brings up a really, really, really good point, and I want to highlight or underscore the fact that, and I love the fact that Drive Change is focused. Like, this is the demographic that you all are working with. James articulated it very clearly: youth between the ages of 18 and 25. Like, very, very focused. But here's the thing, Molly, that there are other organizations who are working with folks in the kind of older kind of population who are returning home. I cannot think, and I'm so mad at myself because I'm usually like a encyclopedia, like with like information. I pride myself on that. I wake up in the morning, I read at least 3 hours in the morning before I even start my day. I'm lying.
Impressive.
I do not. I read a lot, though.
Molly works at the Forward Society, which is
men and women who are returning citizens to help them kind of start a business. It's an entrepreneurial kind of organization.
The five ventures.
That's it.
Yes.
Go ahead, James. Yes, get me together, James. I love it. Defy Ventures. That's exactly the organization I'm talking about. And I had a conversation with the founder of Defy Ventures at at SoCap one year. And one of the things that we both agreed on is the amazing innate entrepreneurial skills that folks who were formerly incarcerated had. And I thought about this because a really good friend of mine teaches entrepreneurship to formerly incarcerated men, and talked about the transferable skills that they have from being boss or drug dealers, and how if they could do that, if they could like push and move product and what they need to know. No, I'm serious, y'all. Like, this is like for real, for real. Like, I don't want you all to like really understand the business components and the mind that drug dealers have in order, in the environment that they have to work in, the dangerous environment that they have to work in. And I'm speaking of young men, even I know women are involved as well. How they have to think about moving product, that's distribution, that's logistics. they name packages like, and I know this because I used to be in a long-term relationship with a man who's formerly incarcerated, but they name packages Purple Rain and Blue Storm, and it's just like, that's marketing.
Yeah.
No, I'm serious.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
this shit is for real, for real. Like, I'm seriously.
Yeah.
Like, they talk about manufacturing and distribution, like, they have to, like, mix it and make it. Like, I'm thinking to myself, yo, you can be, like, a Fortune 500, like, president of a company, and you know how to do this. And there's a hierarchical system, too.
Yeah.
That's that we call an org chart, right? It's, no, I'm serious.
Yeah,
It's like all these transferable skills. If you can do that, you can run your own business.
Yeah.
And so just having those transferable skills and trying to instill that is so important.
It is. I mean, I don't want to.
You laughing, but you know I'm telling the truth. You know listen, we're not going to tell all family business out here in these streets like this, but you know I'm not lying.
I think my business is already out there.
No, but I think what's also important, I do want to say though too, is that, you know, and this comes from knowing the skill that not everybody should be an entrepreneur.
Oh no,
right?
No.
Like that's also a real thing too. And I would even say like without the support or the real that it was a really rough road for me. You know, so just recognizing that I think also, and you and that you work with, you know, they need the team. Right?
Oh,
like they need, it's about, and then if it's someone who is a particular demographic who's starting a company, you know, they're going to hire their friends, like they're going to hire their community, right? It's that opening of that door that then becomes a pathway. And so, you know, I think sometimes, and I think this is something that Echoing Green maybe struggles with too, that like, it's not just the social entrepreneur, right? That like we glorify, or the entrepreneur that we glorify, but it's really identifying what are the key skills inside of not just big companies, but even smaller size companies that are necessary in order for them to really be sustainable. And let's teach to those too.
And here's the thing, Jordyn, I agree with you. Not everybody should be an entrepreneur. I totally agree with you. Some folks just need to go work for somebody. But I do believe that someone's past should not dictate their future.
For sure.
And here's the thing. And I say this too, not only for and women who may be formerly incarcerated or returning citizens, some of them shouldn't be entrepreneurs and should have a job. I mean, you got have you looked at some of these incubators, particularly that's in Silicon Valley? Some of these like young white boys shouldn't be entrepreneurs either, but they get hella resources that are wrapped around them. So I'm thinking to myself, listen, you're right, this entrepreneurship, it doesn't see color, but let's give those boys the same resources and opportunities as we do others.
And that's
because they
the
get
issue.
Resources, they get mentors, they get coaches. You got folks opening up Rolodexes for them, mentoring them, like investing in like crazy ass kind of like apps that's called bodega because you think you're gonna solve the healthy food crisis in New York by creating a cabinet and putting it in the hood. Like who? What?
Yeah,
you raised like $5 million?
I know.
Seriously? And your logo was a cat? Oh God, help us, Jesus. Like, what? Who gave you money?
Oh, man.
I didn't think I could love you anymore.
It was just like,
I love you more than I thought I could love you.
because it's crazy.
It is, but it is that access to resources, right? Where do those pools come from? You know, like why? And I think also it's recognizing, again, going back to that idea around power, right? Like power, what are the structures that are built? What are they built on? Who has the networks? Who doesn't?
That's right.
And really, I think that fundamentally is what we're trying to do at Drive Change.
Absolutely, you are.
Is really about broadening access.
That's
and
right.
broadening access to opportunities in the workplace, but also through networks. You know, it's like coming to events like this, you know, it's inviting and making sure that openness is everything that we do and talk about. Because every resource that I have, any Drive Change fellow should, by nature of being a part of Drive Change, get access to that.
That's right.
If that's something that I can do with my privilege, then I feel good about that.
That's good.
So yeah, I mean, I 100% agree with you. Bodega.
That's it. We got one more. We got time for one more, Kara? You the timekeeper. We got time for one more? Kara's like this.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, one more. Okay, one last.
So, Jana from Echoing Green.
Hey, Jana.
We'd love to ask this as our last question. Hearing all about all the incredible work that you're doing, you and your team. How can everyone in this room, many of them are already, I will say, but how can everyone in this room support you and the incredible work they're doing?
Thank you for asking that question. We joked on the phone that at the end we were going to have everybody chant, "Write that check."
You spoiled the doggone closing chant. Oh my God. You know I have a chant every time. Okay.
I think fundamentally, it is true that we can't do this work without resources. Resources come in lots of forms. Financial contributions to the organization are critical for us to continue to do the work we do, but time is also critical. The specific things, we want people to really start using language that's human forward. So if you could use returning citizen or formerly incarcerated person instead of ex-con, ex-felon, etc., that's something that you own possession of, that you can do, and words really do matter. It's how we build movement and respect around individuals and people. I really would encourage everyone to listen to CAUT, quite honestly. If you want to learn more about kind of the issues that young adults are facing, particularly in New York, but also just broadly in the system, it's super, super important.
It is.
We have these access and awareness days that we're running, which are happening now monthly, and they will likely not happen next month because it's when our fellowship starts. But starting again in July, we're going to be both in Union Square and in Brownsville, one day in each location per month. And we're looking for volunteers to get involved in that work as well, getting out in the street, connecting with people, raising awareness about some of the issues that we're talking about too. And then I'm sure that the fellowship team will think of a lot of other ways for people to help support the Drive Change Fellows that are joining us in June. And then you can eat at the restaurants and the businesses that are partnering with us. So that's a huge part of our work.
Is that on the website?
It will be. And it's a really huge thing. It's like we believe that as a community we grow, and your money in your pocket really matters. You're making a choice every single day where you decide to eat lunch, and I see way too many people standing outside for Chick-fil-A. So, really be able to recognize the power you have in your own pocket when you're choosing your food.
Yes. Jordyn.
Devita.
Love you.
Invite you all to enjoy some more food and drink on Equine Green and continue the conversation in here.
That was great. Thank you so much.